Hello, everyone, and welcome to Africa Fire Mission's weekly virtual training session. My name is Mike. I'm the programs director for Africa Fire Mission. We're so happy that you took time out of your busy schedules to join us for today's training. Today, we're joined by Micheal Dwyer. Michael's got over 40 years of service in the fire service. He's traveled with us last November to Kenya to do some training in person, and he's going to make his debut here on our virtual training session today. So we welcome him and thank him for taking the time out of his schedule to come and share some of his knowledge with us all. Just a few administrative things before we begin. If you stick around for at least 70% of today's training, which is usually about 40 or 45 minutes, you will receive a certificate of attendance for today's training. If you're watching with some other folks on your screen, shoot me an email, and I'll be sure to get them certificates of attendance as well. If you get cut off or you can't finish today's training, you can go to our YouTube channel, find a video. Also in that YouTube description, there'll be a link to our Google Drive where you can watch the video, answer a few questions about today's training, and receive a certificate of attendance for that as well. So I encourage you all to check that out. I'll also post a link to that Google Drive in the chat a little bit later as we move on. At this point in time, sort of without further ado, I'm going to pass things over to Micheal to get us started with today's training. Take it away, sir.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you. I am just beyond honored and excited to be joining you this morning from the great state of Nebraska in the middle of the United States. And really, we say this in fire service a lot, but really honored to be here this morning and to join you. The trip to Nairobi was over the top good and made so many friends, and it's just wonderful and kind of awe-inspiring to be speaking to people around the world. And I've never done that before, so excuse me if I'm a little bit nervous and a little bit anxious, I guess, a little bit. And first time in the arena, and so of course you got to always, and this is true of everything in fire and EMS. You have to kind of battle the elements. But again, Jumbo, it's great to be here. So honored and proud to be able to do this. So just to give you a kind of an orientation, so I am up here in the upper left-hand corner of your screen, clear in the middle of, almost exactly in the middle of the United States, on a little small rural community. We are next to Omaha, which is a fairly large city, but most of our area, and particularly as you go a little bit west of Arlington, it's a pretty rural area. As Mike mentioned, I've been involved in the fire service for 40 years as both a firefighter and an EMT. I also do a lot of work with our government to try to advocate for fire and EMS issues, and that's always a lot of fun. And then I'm also a professional photographer. Excuse me, let me back up. I'm a volunteer. So for any of you that aren't familiar with that system, I'm just a volunteer. So I don't get paid anything. I haven't gotten paid anything for the 40 years that I've devoted to our community. I just wear a little pager on my hip, and now we even have an app for our phone that says, hey, somebody's in trouble. And so I drop what I'm doing and run off and run the call, as most of you do. But then go back to a regular life. And in that life, I've been blessed to be a professional photographer. Part of what I did in Nairobi in November was to take some photographs, about 3,000 of them, and just an incredible honor to be part of that, both as a firefighter, but also as a photographer. So it's great fun, great friends. Really have enjoyed sharing that back here in the States and some of the trials, but also some of the real blessings and the real excitement that the people of Kenya have shown me. And hopefully I've been able to share that a little bit with the people in the States. So part of what I want to talk about today is the difficulties and the challenges that present us in those first 10 minutes. Everybody on this call knows that it can be a little bit like a war zone. It can be incredibly challenging and incredibly hard. I've never been in combat. I don't want to portray myself as some kind of a veteran, but I have been on enough that it does feel a little bit like a war zone when you first walk into that scene. But also, I'm going to repeatedly encourage you to understand that in that environment, what you do in those first 10 minutes is incredibly important. Just a quick story, again, 40 years in the business, and on December 28th, I responded to one of the worst calls in my career, two-vehicle accident on a major highway in our area. One vehicle was fully involved in fire. The other two vehicle was, we had two patients in that that were critically injured, and it was really horrible. And that night, I lost a really good friend. The nature of rural fire and EMS is that a lot of times you know the people that you're serving, and that can be really tough. But on the other hand, great team, great teamwork, great leadership on the scene, and we were able to save two lives that night. That's the nature of our business. It can be extremely difficult, but it also can be really, really rewarding. Um, so during the first 10 minutes, this is the time when we make critical decisions that will affect not only how the scene goes for the rest of the incident, but that'll affect the lives and property of people for many, many years. And again, during that time, it's so important that we just practice a couple of skills, in my opinion, that allow us to be able to really serve the people that we're charged to respond to and serve well. I'm going to kind of break this into four little parts. The first minute, literally the first 60 seconds that you walk on that scene, and kind of what that might look like, and some of the things that I've learned and I think are really critical to be able to make good decisions. Um, Under this heading, first things first. So if you do the first couple of things well, then generally the rest of the incident will go as well as it can. On the other hand, if you get sideways or maybe make a couple of decisions that weren't really wise, then it can be really tough. So if you concentrate on those first things when you arrive on an incident, that can really have a lot of an impact on how the rest of the incident and rest of these people's lives is going to go. One of the things that you learn in volunteer world is that you never know who's going to be the IC or the incident commander for that incident. It may be our chief, it may be an assistant chief, it may be me, who, although I served as an officer for many years, I'm no longer an officer. And you have to make those decisions as if you were, sometimes for only the first few minutes, and then you'll be relieved by a higher a chief or someone else. But for those first couple of minutes, you've got to be able to act, even if you're brand new on the fire department, even if you're brand new in the service, even if you just got your EMT license, you have to be able to act like that incident commander in those first couple of minutes. So one of the things I'm going to encourage you to do is don't recoil from what you're seeing, from all of that horror and all of the drama and all of the sights and the sounds and the smells that are going on. I want you to think more about just recording that. So you're not reacting, you're just recording that, so that you're taking this information in and using it later, not now, but later, to make really good, solid decisions. As a photographer, this is easy for me to get because I think visually and I record stuff. That's what my career was. But on a scene, obviously, literally, I wear a different hat, not this hat. It's a funny little brown thing that plops on my head. But because of that photography experience, I've learned to be a little bit separate of what I'm seeing and just record it. You're trying to absorb the sights, the sounds, and even the smells sometimes that will give you information that you're going to need a little bit down the road. Don't react, but I want you to think about not reacting and responding. We are, by definition, first responders. So if you react to what you're seeing, you're not as effective as you would respond to a scene. In America, we have these things called reactors. They're literally a nuclear bomb that we put in a big box, and we control that to give us a lot of our electric power. But if that thing goes sideways, that's a real bad thing, and can do an incredible amount of damage. And the good news, we've never had that happen. But by controlling that, putting it in its own little box and not reacting, not letting it react, then we're able to be much more effective. Second piece of that is that at some point you do have to respond. So you're not reacting, you're responding. You're not a reactor, you're a responder. But initially, in that first 10 seconds, all you want to do is just collect as much data as you can. But then at some point, radio traffic is going to pick up. If you have a radio, people are going to be running up to you, patients are going to be running up to you, bystanders are going to be running up to you, and want you to act immediately. They want your response immediately. What I'm going to encourage you to do in that first 10 minutes is just, if you have to answer something, 1 word or 1.5 word answers. Yes, no, got it. Or sometimes in America, when we do radio traffic, we say clear. And all that means is just, okay, I got your message, but I'm not going to react now. I'm going to respond in a moment, but I'm not going to react now. This is one of the biggies for me. I don't want, in that first 10 seconds, I don't want you to think too deeply about what you're seeing and what you're hearing and what you're smelling. I'm going to introduce a word here that, and I'm going to kind of go sideways with this whole idea, but just bear with me for a little bit. The idea of the word is flow. So this came out of some research that was done at the London University, and it's a sensation of time sort of slowing down. And if you can do that, your reaction time actually is enhanced, and it feels, elite athletes talk about this. In America, we have football, which isn't like football in most of the rest of the world. It's a bunch of big guys beating up on each other for a ball that isn't round. But for all athletes, they describe it as getting into this zone where you can think and react to an incredibly quick and dynamic environment, but with much more peace. Your thinking and your brain is running effectively, as opposed to just reacting. So I want you to think about the flow and the zone. Again, we're still in that first 10 seconds. So flow, the better balance between the challenges of the situation and your skills for action. And if you think about that athlete, that person on a court, whether it's a basketball court or a soccer field, they're able to get into that zone or flow and have much better balance of how they're acting. If you see those high level athletes, they just seem to almost be out of body a little bit, and that's because they're able to get into that zone. So God forbid you have to respond to a really horrific accident or just a simple fire. In that first 10 seconds, if you can try to find that zone, you and the incident will be served better. Less sensitive, super focused. So all you're doing in this first 10 seconds is just recording. You're just gathering information so that when you get past this, you can make better decisions. Calm and assertive. My wife is a wonderful animal lover. In the States, we have these shelters that take care of hurt animals, and she serves on one of those boards. And in animal training, they teach you to be calm and assertive, calm and assertive. And I'm going to teach you to be calm and assertive, not hyper and daring. At this point, this isn't about dramatic courage and running in with our capes on. And this is about this is about calm and assertive, not hyper and daring. Okay. Don't recoil, just record. Don't react, respond. Don't force, but flow. Okay. Moving on to the first 3 minutes, which is actually the first 4 minutes, because I just wasted the first minute in that first 10 seconds that you're going to do. But there is some things that I really would encourage you to think about. The first two things that you have to actually do. So now you've spent this first 10 seconds or first minute even just recording. You're getting a good sense of what this scene is. The first thing you have to establish is good scene safety. If you don't get that right, this can go south pretty quickly. If you don't record what those chemicals are, if you don't record what the dangers are, if you don't work to keep your responders safe, then not only do you lose a responder, but now you've got another patient, or now you lost a firefighter, and now all of the energy turns to saving that firefighter and not necessarily serving the patients or putting out the fire. Then the second half of that is knowing what you know and what you've seen and the information you're starting to process. Then the next step, particularly in rural areas that I serve, you need some more resources. If you're in an urban area, it's probably as simple as asking for a second or third alarm, calling another station. In rural areas, it's much more complicated than that, because you're trying to put a whole bunch of pieces together, and they may be coming from a great distance. So, everybody still there? Paying attention? This is good so far. So scene safety is number one. Have to get this right. You're watching for any kind of dangers, making sure that your crew is fully staffed up. Is there any chemicals, gas? What do you smell? Are there debris around? Are the vehicles stable? Assume for a minute it's a car accident. Are the vehicles stable enough that you can actually put people in or next to those cars and not have those responders be in danger? If you're on a fire scene, is the structure stable? Before you go running in with our coats open and no air packs and, like you see in the movies, are you sure that's the wise thing to do before you actually know how safe that is? We are responders and we are reactionary by our very nature, but the degree to which you can kind of slow that down will certainly serve you pretty well. Power lines. So part of the looking around thing is you not only want to look out, but you want to look up. So particularly in urban areas, this is more an issue, but still in rural areas too. Before you raise a ladder or set up any kind of lights or anything, you want to make sure you're fully aware of what's going on, not only around you, but up. Scene setup. This is always a big deal for me, particularly in rural areas. A lot of times you don't have a lot of room. So how you set up that first rig when you're first arriving on the scene is really, really important. If it's traffic, we use the biggest, fattest rig, which is usually the one that I'm in because I'm the biggest, fattest guy, to block traffic. And even if we can, we're going to completely shut down that highway. Not necessarily because we just don't want anybody seeing, but we want to make sure that our responders don't have to worry about traffic that's going to be flying by at 60 miles an hour, and maybe putting us in danger. But also, certainly on a fire scene, you want to make sure that those first rigs are set up so you can really effectively fight that fire without a whole lot of distractions, or worst case scenario, have to move that later. Part of that is access, making sure that if you need to, you can get in and out. But other vehicles that are going to serve you, whether it's a different kind of rig or another kind of fire truck or maybe a second fire truck, is in there. Certainly in fire world, wind is a huge issue. So we get, or if we ask for, as we're approaching a scene, we'll typically ask for a wind direction and speed. So just understanding where that's going to be, and sometimes, what do you expect it to do? Can you get on the radio or from your neighbors some kind of an idea of where that wind's at, and can you utilize that and make sure that the wind isn't going to turn and all of a sudden the fire truck you're using to put out most of the fire or an ambulance you're using for patients is a downwind of a chemical leak or a serious fire that's blowing off a bunch of smoke. And what do you expect to happen later? Is there anything about this that's going to change? We have a large rail line, a train line that runs next to my community. And if we're ever working along those tracks or near those tracks, one of the first things that an IC would do is say, hey, shut down the trains. Because if we have to get into an arm wrestling match with a 4 million pound train, I know how that's going to end. Even as tough and intimidating as I can be, I'm probably going to lose that argument. just making sure that if anything's going to change, again, that you're recorded that and you're aware of that, so you at least are thinking about some kind of a plan. And then resources is just huge, again, especially in a large incident and especially in rural areas. In the States, we have a sort of a loosely defined idea of mutual aid. So if I need a neighboring department, if our chief needs a neighboring department, he can use a process called mutual aid, which essentially just says, hey, come help. We could use another couple of people, or we could use another vehicle. And some of that is people power, recognizing that I made the joke with our government officials a lot of times that newsflash, nothing happens in fire and EMS if people don't do it. If somebody doesn't choose to pick up a hose or drive a fire truck or reach out and take the pulse of a patient, if people don't do it, then nothing, very little, nothing maybe, but very little of what we do is going to work, because it just takes people. Fire, EMS, in kind of categories. So do you have enough fire suppression people? Do you have enough EMS people? And what are their certification? What can they do and what, yeah, maybe not? What about law enforcement? Do you need extra people for that? And then others just support stuff. And I'll get into this in a little bit more detail. So for fire, you have enough people that can do suppression. In the United States, we talk a little bit about interior. So is that firefighter certified and trained to be able to go into that blazing inferno effectively? Newsflash, I'm not as young as I used to be, so I'm not our chief's primary fire guy. I wasn't. Um, so I'm not the first choice to be interior. But looking at that, how many of those people you have is really important, being able to kind of do that. And then water, I'm going to back up a little bit, see if it'll let me do that. Yeah, in water, which in a rural area, and from my experience in Nairobi, I know that water is a real issue. So just how are we going to get that water supply? Is there a way that we can supplement and get other people coming? In rural areas in the States, we use big tanker trucks. They can't really pump anything. They just deliver a whole bunch of water. And then if it's a really big incident, and sometimes even if it's not, do you have an additional people or persons that could provide some logistics for you, some leadership support? If the scene is spread out, in the call that I mentioned on December 28th, we had two vehicles that were about 60, 70 yards apart. So I was what I call the short scene commander. So I had the vehicle with the two patients in it. So I was responsible for just making sure that the EMTs in the car treating the patients had everything they needed, and that I could communicate back to command what exactly we were going to need in terms of transports, helicopters, any of the other stuff. In EMS, it's EMTs. If you have anywhere near you the availability of advanced life support, paramedics is what we call them in the States, and I think that's the same in Africa. They can offer a higher level of care, particularly if for some reason you, first of all, got a whole bunch of patients, and then second of all, maybe just a little more advanced care, or if there's a long extrication in a car accident where you have to take a while to get them actually out of the car. And then just other people. There's a lot of other things you can do on a scene, on an EMS scene. You need a driver. You need somebody to maybe run a radio or be communicative, or talk to, or just watch the traffic as the driver's trying to concentrate on him, and the people in back are yelling and screaming about hurry up. Police, they're just an extra partner in the States. They're a huge partner for us. Security, traffic, and maybe an investigation if they're going to need to do that. So that's part of that people piece. And then support, crowd control. If it's a major incident, the last thing you want is a whole bunch of people running around. If you've got several people or several patients that are affected, at some point, this is a little bit farther down the road, but at some point you're going to need to think about safety and shelter, and maybe evacuation from a larger area if God forbid it's some kind of a chemical contamination or something. But just things you don't necessarily need, again, to react to. You don't need to think about this in the first 10 minutes, but at some point in the back of your mind, you're thinking, I want to make sure that I at least have some space, if you will, to be able to serve these kind of things. So that's the first 3 minutes or so, 4 minutes, is scene safety and resources. And if you can sort of, maybe a way to say it is set the table. So picture yourself going to a nice dinner and you're getting the table ready. You want to make sure you have all those pieces in place so that you can set that table. And when you go to dig into that beautiful steak that we have in Nebraska, you want to make sure you have a fork and a really good knife and maybe even a glass of wine. Just making sure that you have that. But of course, first and foremost is scene safety. The last thing you want to do is have a responder injured, because it complicates the scene so much. Now, not only you've lost a responder and gained a patient, but it takes an emotional toll on the rest of the scene, and certainly everybody on the call, I think, probably understands that. Okay. The next 3 minutes, I'm going to kind of split these into two sort of responses, if you will. So in an EMS call, you're going to think, the first thing you're going to think about is triage. And in a fire call, where it's a building, the first thing that I would recommend is that you think about size up. You want to have a really good picture of what's going on. Again, we're only 4 minutes into the incident here, so this is still pretty early stuff. So in the EMS world, triage is really important. I've always been a big fan of a 10-second evaluation. And I'm going to give you a term, and it's just life changing. And I know that the entire nations in Africa and probably Kenya are going to want to send me a lot of money for this revelation, because it's so valuable and it's so incredible and so exciting. Are you ready? Drum roll, please. Okay. Walk up to the patient, of the person that you're suspecting. And again, we're in EMS world. You're suspecting is maybe injured, and here it is. You ready? Hey, how you doing? Okay, that was it. Sorry, send me money. But just that simple statement will tell you a couple of things. Is the patient conscious? Well, if they said, okay, yeah, yeah, hello, then you know that they're conscious. If they were able to speak, you know that they were breathing. And if they're conscious and breathing, then as an EMT, I'm gonna relax a little bit, because that's the first two biggies that I learned the first day of school that you have to have. But beyond that, then you have to make some tough decisions in the context of triage. What's the severity of their injuries, and can they be saved? If they're very serious, you need to upgrade them a little bit. And sometimes in a serious incident, you have to make very quick literally life and death decisions, and those are very difficult. And sometimes you don't have that senior EMT, paramedic, doctor to be able to make those decisions. You have to make those decisions very quickly. And part of that is the severity of their injuries, but also, do you have a good chance to save them? And if you've got a bunch of patients and a limited amount of resources, sometimes, particularly if you sort of compare this to a combat situation, you just have to recognize that, yeah, that person's pretty close, and I'm just not going to be able to save them. I have to use my resources for somebody that I can save. Not sure, and perhaps Mike can weigh in on this later, exactly what system is common in Africa, in Kenya, and does that differ between the different parts of Africa? In the States, we use a green to black system. So green is they're pretty good. They're walking wounded. They're not going to die. So it's pretty good. Yellow, they're a little more serious. They got something going on, but maybe not really urgent. Red is really urgent. They need to get to some kind of care very quickly, or they are going to die. But I've also made the decision that there's a chance of saving them. And then black is somebody we're just going to have to walk by and come back to later. You could do that with a number system. Some areas of the United States even have a tag, so you can fill out that tag very quickly, kind of wrap it around their wrist or tie it to their belt, and that way somebody else come along doesn't have to do that all that over again. Maybe that's a point. You don't want to have to repeat these steps any more than you actually have to. And then at some point, you're going to have to think about moving them. Are they safe in the situation they're at? and is moving them, again, we're in the EMS world for a moment, is moving them going to impact their care? Is there a safe zone reasonably close that you can get them to? Okay. And do you want to stay and we call it stay and play? Do you want to treat them where they lie? Because moving them would maybe injure them further, because you can't get them extricated out of the vehicle or out of the house very quickly. So you're going to stay there and try to provide the best care that you can. In those initial triage, again, we're in the first 4 minutes, those decisions are really important and very, very hard to make. But again, have a huge impact on what's going to happen. So in fire world, a little bit different, but kind of the same principles. You're still looking around, you're still recording stuff. But I'm a big believer in any incident, that the IC has to, or the person is designated as the incident commander, and that could be a brand new firefighter. First thing you need to do is do a 360, a complete walk around the fire, and you're looking at all sides and all hazards. So the flames shooting out of the side of the building are the big ugly, and that's going to get your attention. But what else is going on around this? Is there a propane tank or a propane bottle sitting next to the house? What are the other hazards of weather and water and cliffs and all the other stuff that we run into? Are there any occupants? Is there, are you hearing no kind of noise from the inside of the fire? Or do you hear somebody screaming from the inside of the fire? That's going to change what you do in the following next couple of minutes. Is there fire and where? And is there smoke and where? And I know this is kind of fire 101, but if there's smoke and it's not controlled, it's probably going to be fire at some point. And so even though it might not be the big ugly of occupants screaming out the windows or fire blaring out the windows, certainly you want to understand where that smoke is and where it's going. There's a whole science to being able to read that smoke and know what it's doing and what might be burning. Don't have time, obviously, for that here, but it is cool and exciting stuff. And the last things you're looking for is just the general scope. You're looking big picture stuff. So you're the people inside are screaming and the fire's shooting out the windows, and you got to see that. But you also want to take a minute to just look at the scope. What does the scene look like? What is there a cliff over there? And I remember specifically walking next to a cliff. I also remember when I was initially on in front of a hose line, and the building was full of smoke, and I looked up, and here's this statue of a cow, and the nose was about 6 inches away from mine, and it was just crazy. But you have to be aware of those things. And also in terms of resources, you want to know what the access is like. Not uncommon for us to drive up a 1-lane road, and if you've got a significant incident, trying to get all that stuff in there can be just think a little bit during that size up about what the access is going to look like. So again, second 3 minutes, next 3 minutes, in the EMS world, you're doing triage. You're not going to automatically attack, if you will, excuse the phrase, but you're not going to attack the patient that's screaming the loudest, because if they're screaming, that tells me they're conscious and breathing. So I'm probably at least going to look past them for a moment, and see what else might be out there. And in the fire side, again, just do that 360, big picture, eyes wide open, looking at all the other possibilities. And then the last 3 minutes. This is where the phrase "the rubber kind of hits the road." So now you're settled in a little bit, and you're actually going to accomplish something at this point. So even in the most simple of calls, maybe it's just a medical call in the EMS world. Now you're going to actually start. Again, we're at least 4 minutes into the incident, and I haven't done anything yet. But now you're actually going to start patient care and prioritizing that. In the fire world, now you start to attack the fire. I know that in some paid departments and some aggressive departments, including a lot of the wonderful men and women that I worked with in Nairobi, they're going to be more aggressive than this. Micheal, we're going to be in there a lot for 3 minutes. What are you talking about? But sometimes in a bigger incident, it serves you well to be delayed just a little bit. You're looking for your best providers the best equipment that you can get them and the best support that you can give them. This is not about grand stuff for having IVs or a bunch of other stuff. This is about the best equipment that you have available. Don't let the lack of equipment or the lack of people or the lack of support ever cloud your judgment to be able to serve the people that you're sworn to serve. A provider could be a doctor, nurse, basic life support, advanced life support, and it could be a bystander. I've done a lot of damage with just grabbing somebody from the scene and saying, hey, you know what? You're going to press on this chest for a little while I set up something else. Or you're going to grab that arm and stop it from bleeding while I work on something else. Particularly in rural areas, being able to use those providers is just a huge asset. Best equipment. You may have to do some staging. You may have to have a place, if it's a major incident, where all your equipment is. You may, if it's at night, have to have some kind of lighting so you can actually see. Again, I preached a little while ago about being able to see all that other stuff and equipment, and it's really important that you have good lighting. One piece of staging is sometimes we'll set out a big tarp and we just put everything that we have there, and then you could have runners that actually do that, and that's a piece of having that support. Does command need some help? Critical piece of this is making good decisions, and if you only have one person, maybe that's not enough. Maybe you need deputy chiefs or incident commanders for each of the incident. You probably want to think about security. People with phones is a big deal in the States, and I think it is in Africa as well. Just being able to know, no, we don't need to cloud the scene with extra people here. So at some point, somebody needs to act as security. And then runners, big fan of that. Just run people back and forth so that person that's got patient care doesn't have to walk 100 yards to try to get a Band-Aid. You can use runners, and great opportunity for just bystanders if you can trust them. Again, quick decisions if you can trust them to be able to do that. And then at some point, priority tries transport. You're going to have to coordinate traffic and all the other stuff that goes into that. And I feel strongly as we get into this scene and you have more people arriving and maybe different trucks, maybe police and maybe emergency management as we have in the States, few lights and no sirens. Those are the big screaming things. They're the person leaning out the window in the fire screaming, help me, help me. And that's what those lights and sirens are designed to do. But you don't need that in a scene that's already very, very chaotic. So keep those lights and sirens to a minimum. Sometimes we'll even, we have good radio systems in the States. I'm not sure whether all of the areas in Africa have that. But we'll just try to let everybody know when you get within a half mile of that scene, uh, uh, slow down your lights and kill your sirens, just so the scene doesn't get more chaotic and make it more hard. More hard? Oh, that's great English. Make it harder to be able to communicate. And then fireside, you're just thinking about all the details: pumps, hoses, water, backup. As you manage those resources, where are they going to go? How are they going to set up? At this point, you're just managing resources. You're really not even in a true sense attacking the fire, but you're thinking, particularly if you're still the guy sort of in charge, you're thinking about in those first 10 minutes, how do I allocate all those resources? In the States, we really like to have, we don't always get in the rural world, volunteer world, but we want to have a backup. So if I'm sending two guys into a burning structure, if I'm sending two people into a wrecked car, I want to think about who's going to back them up. If this thing goes south, if there's some kind of a collapse or an explosion inside a fire, I want to have somebody standing there backed up, ready to go into that fire after them. And that's a tough decision because if you only have two or three people, you kind of would like to be putting out the fire, not have them sitting there next to the scene. On the other hand, as soon as you possibly can, try to think about a backup. We call them RIT teams, rapid interior. Boy, I'm sorry, I just drew a blank. Anyway, a RIT team is just an attack team that kind of sits there waiting to go in aggressively into a fire in the case of a God forbid. Placement and access, water, fire is a huge. And again, looking overhead, particularly when you're thinking about where that pump's going to go. And hoses, size wise, we use Ys or angle things that we can make maybe a 4-inch hose divided into 2.5 inches, and it goes to two different parts of the fire. Got to be thinking about pump capacity, and can the pump that I have actually handle all those hoses that I want? I want to be able to throw 6 hoses at this thing, but maybe I don't have the pump capacity to do that. And again, particularly in rural areas, water is just huge. And that's really, in a fire situation in a rural area for us, that's almost the first thing we think about. Because we know that if I got a big pump that can push all kinds of water, that's great. But what am I going to do when it runs out? And just thinking about the logistics of that. And again, we're still only 6, 7 minutes in, is really important. And then, of course, people. You can't do anything without having people. Part of that is just where you're at, particularly with water. How far do they have to transport? What's the distance? Is somebody there to be able to unlock the hydrant, to attach to the hydrant? In the EMS world, time and transport. So how far away am I from advanced life support or from a hospital? And how does that affect those decisions in triage about whether I can save this person or not? And then at the heart of this really is people. The nature of fire and EMS has got to have a whole bunch of people. So the backup is, again, that RIT team that I kind of mentioned is a high level of training, aggressive, good, experienced firefighters with the equipment and the people to be able to do that. Staged, so in a small incident, they're right there at the front, just out of the smoke, ready to attack if something goes south. Or you get to a point that everything's pretty stable and now you can make firefighters out of them. That's great. Where do you stage them? And again, whether you call them a RIT team or come up with your own title, the essence is pretty much the same. Okay, almost done. My friends, and it's kind of just emotional almost to say this to people halfway across the world, but those first 10 minutes are just really critical. This is where leadership happens. These are the moments that change lives and protect lives and save lives. If you can think a little bit more upper, higher, almost like you're up in 100 feet above the incident and look at it in that kind of almost like a chessboard where you're really trying to put those pieces together in those first 10 minutes, your scenes will go better and you'll really do some great work and save some lives and property. And I, based on 40 years of experience and frankly screwing it up a lot of times, just really believe that those first 10 minutes are so critical. Think about the flow, think about getting in that zone so you're the screaming people and the blaring fire and the horrible smells and all that stuff, that's not affecting how you respond and how you process that information so you can calmly and effectively make great decisions. In the first 3 minutes, scene safety's got to be the huge thing, and making sure that at least you're starting the resources that you're going to need 15 minutes from now, because it's going to take a while for them to scramble and drive and set up and gear up and actually get in the scene. And of course, the second half of that is just making sure that you have the bodies to do what fire and EMS do, because that's all we got. Next 3 minutes in EMS, it's triage. You just want to make sure that you're making good decisions about the care that people need and the hard decisions about whether or not I can save this person or not. In fireside, just size up, making sure you have a really good understanding of what you're looking at. If you're in an urban area and the buildings are packed together, we visited the Mathari slums, which is so emotional, but certainly scene size up, it can be a little tougher, to say the least. But trying to get that picture of what you're actually up against. If you make those decisions effectively in the first 3 minutes, it'll make a lot of difference. And then finally, in the EMS world, patient care and transport. This is where you're actually doing stuff. The transport piece can be really complicated. If we have anything beyond, in our world, it's 3 patients. If we have more than 3 patients, then we're going to notify the hospital And we don't officially call it at 3 mass casualty, but we're certainly going to let them know. In our world, if it gets more than 5, then we've got a mass casualty incident, and we're going to notify multiple hospitals. And then, of course, in fire, this is where you're attacking the fire. One of the things I learned in Nairobi from the friends that I taught with is there's a difference between aggressive firefighters in the volunteer world and aggressive firefighters in the career world. And I have so much respect for them because they're aggressive guys. They get at it. And my good friend Bobby Martinez gave a wonderful impassioned speech to the people that were there with us in Nairobi about, hey, this is important stuff. You got to be aggressive. You got to get at it. These are your neighbors. These are your friends. And just a wonderful speech that I'll always remember. So, hey, Asante, thank you like times 100 for the great honor and opportunity um, to just be able to do this and talk a little bit about what all of us are so passionate about. So, I didn't take the opportunity to do this, and I know my friend Jose wasn't able to be here this morning, but I'm just going to say a brief prayer for everything that you do in your homes, in your cities, in your countries. Father, thank you so much for these people. They serve, they serve. And Father, you stress to us how important that service is. And this is important stuff, lives and property, and the life of the people that we serve with, and the life of the people that we serve. So, Father, bless them, encourage them, champion them, give them everything that they need. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, thank you. Question. Howard, you're driving. I'm sorry, Mike,
Okay,
you're driving. Excuse me.
that's all right. At this point in time, we'll open up the floor to any questions that anybody may have. You can add a question in the chat, use the raise hand feature, or just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask any questions. We've got one in the chat there. Nice presentation. Kindly repeat on the backup team. Are they part of the first appliance to turn out the scene, or do they come later to offer support to the fire team at the scene?
And that's a great question. In a in a in a hopeful world, they would be there right away. They would just sort of magically appear from the clouds, and they would be there instantly, maybe even before us. That doesn't happen in our world, and it probably nowhere else in the world. So it's probably the answer to the question is probably a little bit later. Um, Hard decision for IC incident commander is, do I send I really need an aggressive firefighter, and then maybe there's somebody that's trapped and that's still screaming, which tells me they're breathing and conscious, but they may not be for a while. And you got to make a hard decision about whether to send anybody in there without a team backing them up and ready to go save them if they have to. And those are hard decisions. I don't know that there's a perfect answer that I can give you when or when not to. Maybe Mike can weigh in, but the only quick answer I would give as soon as possible, as soon as you have just enough people to both attack the fire, but also before I got too crazy with putting people over here and over there and doing other things, I would want to make sure that at the very least I knew what my backup plan was. I hope that answers the question.
All right, this time I think I'm going to wrap up sort of the formal portion of our training session here by thanking Michael for taking the time out of his schedule to come and join us, sharing all those years of experience and expertise with us. It was much appreciated. Glad to have you here today. And for all of you, appreciate you guys taking the time out of your schedules as well to come and advance your training and to find ways to better serve your community, especially today. I know today's a holiday, so it's good to see you guys that you were able to make yourselves available and join us today. I would encourage you all. We've got plenty of seats in the room, so please share the registration link or the information with any of your colleagues that you may have. We've got plenty of seats available. Share this training with anybody that you think could benefit from it. And we hope to see you all again next week. Thank you.